Hi American Lit folks. I just wanted to give you a quick video update about the guidelines and expectations for week number 4. Yay, week 4! We're very close to the finish line, so if you're feeling fatigued and tired and worn out, you're not alone, I'm sure, but we are very close to the finish line, so just hang in there. Y'all are doing an amazing and awesome job, so keep it up. I do want you to note, however, that the last day to withdraw, where it won't count against your grade point average, the last date for a W for withdraw is going to be the 23rd, so that's something to keep in mind. I hope you don't have to consider it for our class, but if it is something you want to at least kind of touch base about, let's definitely talk during office hours, or we can schedule a time for a WebEx meeting or whatever's easiest for you. I don't want anybody to feel like they need to drop, but of course that is your right? So something to just think about, hopefully for other classes, not necessarily for ours. So I'm going to go through our syllabus just to kind of refresh your memories about what we're doing this week, and then I'll walk through the various assignments, okay? So if I pull up D2L, right, and go to week number 4, that's where all that information is. But what I first want to do is kind of walk through the syllabus, okay? So you'll see that up at the top for next week, which is coming up this week, right, you have reading on just generally the background of American literature from 1820 to 1865. That's some background and context written by our editors. And then we'll get into some fiction, right? Up until now, we've basically stuck to nonfiction, some heavy readings, right? Really important historically, some important readings and very important figures. But now we're getting into a little bit of fiction, right, with Hawthorne and also with Edgar Allan Poe. So you'll need to read not only their biographies as written by the editors, right, but also those texts, okay? So for on Monday, the prompts will be posted and appear at 8 a.m. Wednesday's writing journal is going to be based on this background reading, American Lit 1820 to 1865. So make sure you have that read and you're ready to go by then. And for this week, we will be responding to 2 of our colleagues, so that's another kind of due date and information to keep in mind when it comes down to planning your week. And then on Friday, you'll have a reading response that is directly related to Hawthorne's short story and biography. Okay, so keep in mind. And at the same time, you have a due date and time for your responses to 2 colleagues from that writing journal assignment. And then on Sunday, as usual, we have our paper topic discussion post, and that is going to be, I put that it's examining and connecting Hawthorne to Poe, but when I went to create it, I really want to give Poe that space and for you to focus on Poe specifically. You can definitely bring Hawthorne into the conversation. That's just not a requirement, right? So if you're seeing some of those connections, I definitely want you to dig into them and explore those. But overall, I'm just aiming for some understanding and analysis of Poe specifically. But again, bring Hawthorne in if you're seeing things that you really want to draw out in the paper topic post, okay? So I do want you to really be aware that next week, not this upcoming week, but next week is when we'll be working on the peer review session for our paper portfolio, right? So we'll be collecting all the paper topic submissions that you've had so far. You'll revise them, edit them, reconsider them, and then compile them in a single document. And remember that the rubric is posted on D2L, so go back, just take a look and kind of know what's coming up, because I don't want that to hit anybody as a surprise next week, because next week we will move quite quickly. So make sure that you're going back and rethinking about some of that. Additionally, I am going to give you feedback on some of your paper topics. I have not been able to finish all of those yet, but I will be doing that within the next couple of days. So I will open those discussion boards again so you can see that feedback and those points, so that you can start that revision process whenever it fits into your schedule, okay? So just remember to take a look at the requirements and everything. Remember that in addition to revising those original paper topic submissions, you will then also need a kind of additional paragraph, right, that is supplying some context and information about your revision process, the original writing process, the original ideas that you had, how you might be thinking differently about those things. So this isn't just a recycling previous work and dumping it into a document. It is reviewing and revising that previous work, taking some time to write through, and identify some of the things that you've considered, right? So that your audience gets some understanding of what they're reading, and then putting together a works cited, okay? So some work that you definitely want to keep in mind, okay? So for this week, if we're in the overview, we can click on over to week 4 and see that we do have a writing journal that's based solely on that background information about American Lit 1820 to 1865. So I want a brief summary, okay? And some of y'all have been including works cited, which I think is wonderful practice. You don't have to do that, but again, if you want to include that, by all means, feel free to do so. It's just not a requirement. So if the others of you are seeing, your colleagues doing that, don't feel that you have to. Again, it's great practice, okay? I want you to, after the 2 paragraphs of summary, compose 2 paragraphs that identify 2 points, right? 2 things that you discover, 2, useful bits of information about this time period. So the first 2 paragraphs are just summary. The next 2, one for each paragraph, 1 point that you think is important, one thing you learned. It's the topic is fairly open from there. And then finally, you need to create 2 thought-provoking questions for your colleagues, whether it's about that time period. It needs to be within the scope of that reading. But remember, we want to avoid any kinds of questions that are really seeking a yes or no response. We want some in-depth analysis. We want to push each other to think more and to add some layers to our thinking. So just some things to keep in mind. And you'll need to respond to 2 colleagues by Friday. Okay, so Friday you not only have your reading response, which we'll talk about in a second, but also these 2 responses from the writing journal. For the reading response, we're going to focus on Hawthorne, right? So focusing on the biography written by our editors and then the short story. I don't know how many of you might be familiar with Hawthorne just generally, but also this short story, which is fairly popular. Hawthorne's an interesting character to consider, and I think really connects well to Poe, which we'll talk about in a second. But for this reading, I want you to, in 3 paragraphs, I want you to apply some literary terminology to your reading. So I have a link here that's to the Purdue Online Writing Lab website, where there's some literary terminology, which we've addressed previously, right? But I want you to dig into some more of that in your reading. And then I also want you to, let me get back to where I was. Let's just go there. Okay. And then I want you to, take those 3 paragraphs and apply one of the terms to each. Okay, I skipped a step though. The first thing I want you to do is identify those 3 terms and in your own words, define them, right? Show your understanding is basically what I'm looking for. So don't choose terminology that you're not familiar with, or if you do choose some terminology that's new to you, which I encourage, just make sure you have a good understanding of what those terms mean, okay? So after you put those 3 terms in your own words, which can just be a single paragraph, right? I want 3 paragraphs where you take 1 term and apply each in a paragraph to Hawthorne's text, okay? And then finally, in 2 paragraphs, I want you to choose a lens through which to read Hawthorne's work, okay? There are a lot of possibilities, right? So I want you to stick to the options that are included in the Purdue OWL site. There should be a link there, which I'll just double check. But if you go to the link that I'll put in, you'll find information about literary theory. So here is some introductory information about literary theory in general. This may be new to some of you and perhaps not to all, but it's a good refresher no matter what your level of comfort is or your familiarity. So in literary studies, a lot of times we need to focus our lens, right? The lens through which we're examining our work. We've done some of that so far. Now we're just going to get a little focused on these specific areas of emphasis, right? So if you're interested in Marxist criticism, some of you may identify as, young Marxists. If you click on this link, there's some information about, where to go in terms of literature. What questions should we ask when we're viewing literary productions through a Marxist lens? If you want to focus on critical race theory, here's some information and introduction, and then some questions. Why use this approach, right? The Purdue OWL does a really great job. It's not it's not as much information as is out there for these different theories, but it's a really great place for us to kind of start. There's feminist criticism, gender studies, and queer theory. If you want to focus on eco-criticism and that kind of information, just click on it, Make sure that you're reading through it, understanding the different implications of these different literary theories, and then thinking about how they apply to Hawthorne's text, right? So if we go back to the prompt, 2 paragraphs, choose a lens, right? And the second paragraph, the first paragraph I want you to summarize, right? Show your understanding of that theory, what you take that theory to mean, the lens through which you're going to then read Hawthorne. And then in the second paragraph, apply that theory, right? So we're not getting too deep into our analysis. We're just exploring, we're just getting a little bit more comfortable with this idea of using that particular lens when thinking about literature in general, okay? So your response is going to be due by 11:59 p.m. right, on Friday the 26th, and remember at the same time, that's when you need to respond to 2 folks in the writing journal. Okay, so just some due dates to keep in mind. Now let's move to our paper topic, okay? This one's a little bit more in depth. I'm requiring a little bit more, but don't be put off by that. We definitely have this. After reading Poe's biography, right, and the text, I want you to set up some sort of argumentative mini essay or paper. It can be looking at literary terminology, which is really a way to focus on how Poe pieces together his ideas, right? He is using some very specific approaches, and literary terminology and identifying that helps us see, you know, how he is writing, because it is intentional. Or you can look back at the literary theory, right? If you want to use one of those lenses through which to apply to your reading of Poe, right? So take some time to read through this, and then you'll do a 5-paragraph kind of essay. Okay, so, you know, and this is going to be very traditional. You have your introductory paragraph with your thesis. I've put a link here just to review thesis statements if you need a bit of a refresher. You have that introductory paragraph where you're really letting your audience know where you're going and what you're doing. And then you have 3 supporting paragraphs. So if you're looking through the lens of literary terminology, you can have 1 paragraph for each term, right? You don't want to recycle what you've done already with Hawthorne, but you can still apply that format. If you're looking at something like a particular literary theory, then you can use each paragraph to extend, right, your analysis based on feminist criticism, eco-criticism, some of the tenets or some of the points within those literary theories, right? But the sky's really the limit as long as you are developing your ideas, right? You, within 5 paragraphs, can really address, you know, the argument that you've created in your thesis. So don't strive for this big, huge, overarching, mind-blowing idea, you know, when it comes to Poe's work, because people have written entire books about those kinds of topics, right? So you want to narrow your focus a little bit, right? And choosing some terminology or some theory to do that that's very helpful. That's why we do it. Okay, and I put here, your goal is to show understanding on more than a summary level, right? We have all read the text. We don't want to read a summary of it. We want to see what your thoughts are. What are you digging into? What are you digging, right, when it comes to Poe's text? And as I mentioned previously, if you want to connect to Hawthorne, you certainly can do that. It's just not a requirement. I just wanted a little bit more space with Poe for this entry, okay? Your response is going to be due on Sunday, and I did put a reminder here about the due date and everything for the paper topic. So just, you know, some things, your paper topic portfolios, right? So just some things to keep in mind. But generally, that's all we have for this week. I say that even though it's quite a bit of work. I'm not trying to dismiss the fact that it is a writing heavy kind of week, but I have absolute faith in the fact that y'all are already producing such awesome work. I really look forward to reading this. I do want to offer you also my thanks for all the engagement that I'm seeing in the Q&A discussion board. I love that some of you are jumping in and helping one another, answering those questions. It means that I can sit back and I'm reading them and loving the fact that you're providing some really useful answers. If I see something that's not quite hitting the mark when it comes to an answer, I'll jump in. But for the most part, y'all are doing such a great job, and I really appreciate the fact that you're taking advantage of that space. That's really awesome. The last note, again, if you didn't hear me before, or if I'm rushing through things, I'm sorry. I'm not feeling my best right now. I will be providing some feedback for your paper topics, mostly last week's, right? So keep an eye out for that. I will, of course, post just in our general announcement section when I've done that. And also Mr. Nance, as our tutor, will be in there responding to some of you as well. Also, as you're starting to think about revising and editing your paper topic portfolio, make an appointment with Mr. Nance to work through some of your ideas. There's nothing wrong with not only getting feedback from your peers in the peer review session, but also a tutor who knows the class in and out and MLA in and out, right? And he's got wonderful things to add when it comes to literature. So trust his judgment too. All right, y'all, good luck this week. Hang in there. Y'all are doing awesome.